Hello, and welcome to Based on Faith, where I talk about books based on my faith in Christ. Today I'm going to be reviewing Caleb. Caleb is the second installment in the Sons of Encouragement series authored by Francine, and the genre is Christian historical fiction. There's a lot of war and bloodshed in this book, so I'm going to have to add maybe action as well. I'm not sure if action is a genre, but I'll just say action. It's definitely not adventure. Might be adventure. I don't think it was so much adventure. I think it's a bit more whatever genre you classify books about war, and that have a lot of bloodshed in. So if anyone knows it, just let me know in the comment section. And as always, I will be starting with a non-spoilery summary. So the blurb on Amazon reads: a man of fire whose words stirred men's hearts, a man of action whose courage saved men's lives, a man of faith whose passion drove him to God. Joshua succeeded Moses as the nation's leader, but it was Caleb's zeal that pushed the people to put their faith into action, be challenged by this faithful man whose story we must never forget. The Warrior is the story of Caleb and book 2 in the popular Sons of Encouragement series about 5 men who quietly changed eternity. The Warrior starts around the first half of the first book, Aaron. So it's told from Caleb's perspective midway through the 10 plagues in Egypt. So before I get into any more detail, I'll read out the note to the readers at the start of the book on the conflicts regarding Caleb's genealogy. So at the start of The Warrior, Francine wrote a note to readers concerning some of the disputes regarding Caleb's ancestry and genealogy. So she says, Bible scholars differ in their opinions as to whether the Caleb whose genealogy is listed in 1 Chronicles 2 is the same Caleb who scouted the promised land with Joshua in Numbers chapter 13. We know that Caleb the scout had a daughter named Acsah, Joshua chapter 15 verse 16, and the Caleb in 1 Chronicles 2 also had a daughter named Acsah. That's chapter 2 verse 49 of 1 Chronicles. This correspondence has prompted the author to choose for the purpose of this story the view that they are both indeed the same person. Okay, I added both. They are indeed the same person. With this interpretation, references to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, are taken to mean Caleb, descendant of Jephunneh. So basically, Rivers writes this story as though the Caleb that's been mentioned in 1 Chronicles 2 and Numbers 13 are one and the same person. So we know that she crafts these stories about information that we already have from the Bible. So basically, she's merging these informations and using it to craft this story that we have in The Warrior. And, I think it's a good note to readers. All right, moving on. So Caleb's story starts with him being an outsider joining the tribe of Israel. He was descended from Esau's oldest son, Eliphaz. Esau's descendants are not counted among the descendants of Jacob. He was an outsider and he wanted to be counted among the people of Israel, so God's wrath would pass over him and his family, and he eventually became a tribal leader in Judah through this story. In my review of the first book, I mentioned the issue of faith, and I can't help but wonder if I mentioned the issue of faith a bit prematurely, because it seemed that where the people of Israel struggled in their own faith is where Caleb particularly excelled. And in his own words, God was ever on their lips, but clearly they did not trust the signs nor their deliverer. And we see through Israel's journey out of Egypt, through the Red Sea, and even into the promised land that Caleb's faith in God is tested and is continually challenged by his family, from his father to even his children. And for those who might remember, Caleb was one of the spies sent out to scout Canaan, and one of the two, Joshua being the other, who came back with good reports. And this particular incident, scouting the promised land Canaan, that took 40 days, spiraled into Israel's rebellion against God, one of their many rebellions, and eventually their punishments to wander the wilderness for 40 years, a year for each day that the spies were in Canaan. And the older generation, save for Joshua and Caleb, died off in the wilderness, with only the younger generation seeing the promised land. And now I'm going to just go into the quick details of the book. What was my favorite character? My favorite character in this book had to be Acsah. She came a bit towards the end of the book, and I love that character because I love a smart, enterprising woman, who can make a way for herself in times that were not particularly favorable to her, and she was also a woman who loved her God. And that's all I'm going to say on that. I think that's a person I aspire to be, somebody who loves God, but somebody who is also smart and makes and excellently uses the resources that have been given to her by God. That's who I'm trying to be. The problems our main character encountered, Caleb, is that he had to learn to control his anger towards the Israelites. So Caleb was about 40 years old when he went to scout Canaan, plus another 40 years of wandering. That equals him being an old man by the time he is entering into his promised inheritance. And I think that can just be particularly frustrating when they were told to go scout the promised land. It was kind of them pretty much being guaranteed to enter into the promised land within the next year. And he must have been so excited. And when the Israelites rebelled, that must have just been, I don't know how I would feel, if I did everything right and then I end up being punished. If I do everything right and I end up being punished because the people I surrounded myself with decided to move mad, I would be pissed off. I would feel it's unfair. I would completely feel it's unfair, and I would be completely annoyed. And God would have to teach me to be calm and to be mellow, because it's a frustrating situation to be in. At 40, he's kind of like still in the prime of his life. He can do things, but at 80, these were not the times when people, still lived for like 150, 200, 300, 400 years. People had started dying out, around 100 years. So that must definitely have been particularly frustrating for Caleb. And some of the things I didn't like about this book is the fact that, throughout my reading of the book, I was just reminded of the fact that these were different times for women. And I'm not saying that times today are perfect, but I can't help but thank God I was not born then, because oh my goodness. Another thing is, again, different times in terms of war, bloodshed, but there was a lot of bloodshed. It was too much. And I think this almost caused me to DNF this book, that is, not finish the book, but I just had to see it through to the end because it's like a book in a series, and I'm glad I saw it to the end because the next book was definitely one of my favorites. But I do not particularly enjoy bloodshed, and I will not be picking up this book to read it again. I've read it, I've learned what I need to learn, and I'm not picking it up again. Done. Also, one thing I couldn't help but notice was that throughout the book, Rivers portrays Joshua as a timid person on multiple occasions. And it rubbed me off the wrong way. I was like, what's happening here? Why does she keep referring to Joshua as this timid person? And then I went to Bible Gateway and I searched up Be Strong and Courageous. And when I say I see why now, I see why now. Because come with me, Deuteronomy 31 verse 6. So be strong and courageous. This is Moses talking to Joshua. Verse 7. Be strong and courageous. Verse 23, be strong and courageous. Then we'll move on to Joshua chapter 1. Now it's God speaking to Joshua. Be strong and courageous. Verse 7, be strong and courageous. Verse 9, be strong and courageous. Verse 18, be strong and courageous. And like, if someone has to say be strong and courageous to you that many times, then maybe we almost have good enough solid grounding to stand on to assume that you were maybe a timid person. And beautifully, we see from chapter 1 of Joshua to chapter 10 of Joshua is now telling his men, be strong and courageous. Don't ever be afraid or discouraged. And so it's just beautiful how we see Joshua being encouraged to be strong and courageous, to him now telling people to be strong and courageous. And I'm like, maybe it was timid, but then maybe it was also that the Israelites were rebellious people. They are people who do not listen. They are a people that are hard to lead. Even God himself, so many times they rebel against God. So they are not particularly the easiest people to lead. And one can really understand where Joshua is, the reason for Joshua's timidity in leading the Israelites. And it's beautiful that in spite his assumed timidity, he's still used by God to lead these Israelites. And it just reminds me of the verse in Philippians, I can't remember one. Is it 1 verse 9? 4 verse 19? that says I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And in my weakness he is made strong. So it's kind of like in I'm not going to say anything else. So rounding up my review, I like how the stories are not reading this book. I really enjoy how the stories are not broken up into chapters but one continuous story. By chapters I'm not talking about book chapters, but rather I'm talking about biblical chapters, because sometimes reading the Bible, those chapters can sometimes separate stories and not help one see the big picture. And I think personally for me, in seeing the big picture of things, one tool that's particularly helped me are audio Bibles and Bible reading podcasts, because when they're reading they don't go chapter, they just move on to the next chapter. Sometimes you go to like 5 chapters of the same story and you're able to like flow through the story completely without looking at those verses, because those verses and chapter numberings can be confusing at times. And Bible podcasts also help me. Sometimes I just turn it on at night when I'm about to sleep and I'm just listening to the story, and it almost reads like, a book. Well, it is a book, but it just really helps with seeing the big picture of things, because I think as Christians we sometimes focus on the details of things, in our reading through verses, and looking at the big picture of things sometimes helps us put the whole picture of things together. And one more thing I enjoy about these books is that we get to like focus on one person. Like we get to focus on those background characters that when we're reading through the Bible, we don't really focus much on them unless if we're doing like a character study. So these books are kind of like character studies on those men. And one thing I would just say, quick note, is that you should remember that this is fiction and you need to do some research to see if to see what part of the book is based in fiction and is based on truth. So that you don't end up attributing qualities that characters do not possess to them. And I think Rivers does a beautiful job in in having some of the chapters she drew this story from at the end of the book. And I would really encourage anyone who reads this book to like read those parts, so that you at least know what in what you just read was based on truth and what was based on fiction. So that's pretty much it. It was a good book. I enjoyed some parts of it. I will not be picking it up to read it again because I'm not a fan of those types of books. And with that, I've come to the end of this book review. If you've not seen my review of the first part of this book, Aaron, here's the review. It basically talks about Aaron's experiences being the elder brother of the deliverer of Israel. We all know who Aaron is, and I think it's humanized Aaron and even Moses and also Miriam for me. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.